On the 26th of March 1920, American writer F. Scott Fitzgerald published his first full-length novel, This Side of Paradise. It's an entrancing view into the hedonistic youth culture of an America on the eve of the flamboyant jazz age, the so-called Roaring Twenties. The book follows a young, aspiring writer in his attempts to romance various upper-class women, while also grappling with his academic requirements and the effects of the First World War. It is also effectively an autobiography. If Paradise was successful, it would enable Fitzgerald to marry a wealthy young woman whom he had desired for the past few years. If it wasn't, he was going to leap from the window of a very tall building. F. Scott Fitzgerald just could not catch a break. In 1897, only a year after he was born, the family business went under, and his father would spend the rest of his life a broke alcoholic. But Fitzgerald had a knack for writing fiction, publishing stories in a school newspaper and later for various clubs during his time at Princeton University. It was also during this time that he fell in love with a wealthy socialite named Geneva King, frequently visiting her at her school in Connecticut until she was expelled for having too much game. But even moving away wasn't enough to deter Fitzgerald, who travelled halfway across the country to meet her at her family's estate, only to be rejected by them. He was simply too low class. As you do in this situation, Fitzgerald was immediately determined to end his life. As such, he decided to enlist to fight in the war, in the hope that he would die in combat. Before he was sent off, hoping to leave a mark on the world, he quickly hammered out a 120,000-word draft for a novel, and although his publisher rejected it, his talent was recognized, and he was encouraged to revise and resubmit it while he was still stationed in the US. Instead of doing this, he immediately began flirting with various women and attempting to find a rebound girlfriend. While stationed in Alabama, he fell in love with another wealthy socialite, Zelda Sayre, who also had feelings for him. But just to cover his bases, he also wrote to Geneva asking if there was any chance they could maybe get back together. Sorry, I'm marrying a rich guy now. Zelda also refused to marry him until he was financially successful enough for her, eventually breaking off their engagement, while Fitzgerald tried desperately to get published. By late 1919, he was completely crushed, broke, and again planning on ending his life. In one final attempt, he revised his previous novel draft and submitted it for publication one more time. It was accepted. This Side of Paradise was an instant success, immediately catapulting Fitzgerald to the cultural mainstream and allowing him to marry Zelda, even though the two now felt more like friends than lovers. Nonetheless, they immediately began living in luxury across various hotels in New York City. This period of extravagance and hedonism eventually culminated in Fitzgerald breaking down in the back of a taxi, realizing he would never be as happy as he had just been. Material satisfaction can only last for so long. It was at this point he came to the revelation that this feeling also encapsulated the jazz age in general. It was a shallow, self-gratifying display of excess. He channeled this feeling into his second novel, The Beautiful and Damned, which also took heavy inspiration from his and Zelda's lives. His continued success both maintained his expensive lifestyle and boosted his ego. However, despite being wealthy and mingling with the elite, Fitzgerald was not really part of the elite. As an outsider, he began to abhor the self-serving wealthy lifestyle he was simultaneously trying to emulate. With this conflict in mind, he took some inspiration from various places in his life and friendships to form the basis for his third novel, The Great Gatsby. After multiple revisions, another marital crisis, and Fitzgerald punching a police officer, Gatsby released in April 1925. Its critical reception was favorable. It was undoubtedly a great book, but commercially it fell flat. This would be the beginning of Fitzgerald's gradual decline. His wife Zelda simultaneously resented him and demanded he continue writing short stories in magazines in order to maintain her expensive, carefree lifestyle. When he ignored her at a party to talk to another woman, she threw herself down a flight of stairs. By 1930, his attempts at finishing his fourth novel were beset by alcoholism, lethargy, and the time he had to spend writing short stories to pay for his wife's psychiatric treatment, as she was now clinically insane. He eventually released a fourth novel in 1934, but by this point the Great Depression had set in, and Fitzgerald's novels began to represent an excessive bygone era that many now resented. He was no longer able to maintain his fancy lifestyle, and soon his excessive drinking prevented him from writing entirely. However, this low period would not last forever, and Fitzgerald's popular resurgence would come from an unexpected place. During the Second World War, the American Council on Books in Wartime distributed copies of The Great Gatsby to soldiers stationed overseas. People began to understand the novel not as an emblem of the hedonistic jazz age, but as a nuanced criticism from the perspective of a self-made man attempting to fit in with the wealthy elite. By the end of the war, the deeper, more insightful layers to Fitzgerald's writing were finally being recognized. There was only one problem. He was dead. Heart attack in 1940. It wasn't even the alcohol that killed him, he'd just managed to kick that. After decades of struggle and perseverance, F. Scott Fitzgerald died believing himself to be a failure, destined to be forgotten. Today, he's regarded as one of the greatest American writers of his time, and Gatsby is widely considered to be a masterpiece of literature. His influence cannot be overstated. He was a fantastic writer, a flawed person, an unfortunate victim of circumstance, and eventually, once the world found a place for him, he was recognized. 3/4 of a century later, another man's works were experiencing an unexpected resurgence in popularity. The only difference was he was lucky enough to be alive to see it happen.
テトリスのゲームこれ作ってるんですか？
そうですよ。
見せろよじゃあ。
For the first time in years, Ichiro Mihara felt hope for the TGM series, and he was ready to put his animosity behind him and work with the West to capitalize on its newfound attention. Probably. In March of 2015, a brand new Twitter account was created specifically to promote the TGM series and manage user-posted media instead of just having it taken down. To this end, players both in and out of Japan were encouraged to post TGM media with hashtag TGM series, granted they follow a few rules. It's the same sort of thing as the short-lived Club TGM idea, just with more permissive guidelines. The account was being managed by an Arika employee and former Tetris producer named Mr. Kondo, who would also be in charge of something even more exciting. Shortly after the account was created, Mihara and Kondo announced that an American location test was planned for sometime in the next few months. They initially considered testing an updated version of TI, until eventually settling on TGM4. Introducing they don't have a license yet, so it's just the Grandmaster for now. Mihara also stated that they were still only able to get an arcade release, which, in American arcades, we're off to a great start.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Emmett Brown. I'm standing on the parking lot at Twin Pines Mall.
On a warm night in 1985, Marty McFly and Doc Brown first tested time travel on the parking lot of the Twin Pines Mall. It was on this date that McFly traveled 30 years into the past and had a fling with his own mother. If he instead traveled 30 years into the future, he coincidentally would have arrived to see a group of Arika employees at the exact same mall to set up for a TGM4 location test. Like with the 2009 test, the two playable modes were Rounds and Konoha. In fact, the game was still largely the same, just with a shoddy English translation. The highest level reached in Rounds was a 1580 by Kevin, although Mihara claimed there to be another undiscovered gimmick in that the mode went a lot further. As with the 2009 test, the player base was pretty much exclusively existing TGM fans. To be honest, I'm not exactly sure what Arika was trying to accomplish with this, but the community was just happy they were making an effort. They also did another test in Japan, but since it was a profitability test, the time and place weren't shared in advance. The results from that are unclear, but I'm going to assume the game had not magically grown more appealing in the past 6 years. After the location tests, Arika began seeking out a publisher, and in the meantime, Mihara and Kondo went quiet. Meanwhile, the TGM crew had been invited to perform again at the other major GDQ event, Summer Games Done Quick, taking place in late July. Attending this time around was Kataru, Kevin, Klex, 3 new Western players, and 2 of the top Japanese players, Khan and SQR. The segment featured an incredibly gripping death race between Klex and SQR, a doubles race, SQR and Kataru playing with themselves, some other bullshit, and finally the main events, Khan and Kevin playing TI Master and Shirase.
If you think that this cannot get any better, then I strongly recommend that you support the potential release of a new Tetris Grandmaster game.
In September, Mihara shed some light on the TGM4 situation, and it was pretty much exactly what everyone expected. They weren't able to find a Japanese publisher, they probably wouldn't be able to find an American publisher, and every platform besides arcades was either exclusively owned by another company or would simply cost too much. I mean, what publisher was ever going to accept a game that was literally marked not for beginners in the location tests? Thanks for trying though. And the silver lining was that Mihara had somewhat opened up to the Western community, even if he couldn't offer them an official way to play besides importing the expensive boards. I don't think he realized until AGDQ just how many Western players had bought real boards. But either way, all anyone could really do was wait and hope for the golden opportunity to make a port happen. In lighter news, the TGM crew had been re-invited to take part in SGDQ 2016. The TGM hardware always took notoriously long to set up compared to most other games at the GDQ events, but this time around it took even longer. For AGDQ, the setup had taken around 20 minutes, for SGDQ around 35, and in 2016 it took over 45, eating into much of their block of time. There were some decent runs all around, and this time Pucci performed Sakura blindfolded, a feat only possible due to the mode having the same piece sequence each game. But exhibitions weren't only being broadcasted online. Earlier that year, the TGM series had been taken to television in an unexpected country. In December 2011, Germany began broadcasting a game show called Deutschland Superhirn with the aim of finding the smartest and most talented people in the country. A few years later, China launched its own version, known simply as Superbrain. In the Chinese version of the show, the first few episodes of each season focus on giving contestants a variety of challenges based around memory skills or mental ability, usually in specific areas they claim to excel at, and those who complete the most impressive challenges, according to the judges, go on to compete against a set of foreign teams with their own best people. This was not helping China beat the Asian mega nerd stereotype.
My math specialist, look at him. You notice anything different about him? Look at his face.
That's pretty racist.
Of note to us is the 4th episode of Season 3, which premiered in January 2016. It introduces the proclaimed King of Gaming Wu Songhao, who announces that his challenge is to outlast a team of 6 other gamers in a game of Tetris. As it turns out, the Tetris game in question is TI, and the mode they'll be playing is Shirase. After a cheesy intro, both sides are off, and the skill difference between Song Hao and the other group is immediately apparent. All 6 members of the supposed gamer team top out by the 92nd mark, and Song Hao wins the match just over 200 levels in. Not too bad, but if he really is the Tetris master he claims to be, the show will have to throw something a lot more serious at him. After surviving another game with the pieces obscured for 5 minutes, Song Hao convinces all of the judges and is promoted to the next round. We next see him in episode 11, this time as part of a team of 4 selected to face off against a Japanese team. Song Hao's Japanese rival is the so-called golden finger of gaming Kibi Hiroyoshi, known by his online name Hebomai. Yes, his name is derived from Heberus, and yes, I only recently realized it's usually pronounced Heberus. Hebomai has played a variety of Tetris games, including the TGM series, so he's a seriously dangerous opponent. After utterly humiliating him for an easy laugh and making him drink the weird walnut milk that's sponsoring the show, the 2 contestants take their seats and begin a heads-on 20G race to clear 200 lines. Hebomai completely obliterates Song Hao in the first round, finishing a minute and a half ahead, much to the surprise of the judges. No matter, this round gives the least points, and Song Hao claims that the second round is where he can bring his best. The second round's format is simple. Both players have 2 minutes to clear the most lines in invisible Tetris. Song Hao initially appears to have been correct.
不，可是这个击背的他已经快要到顶了，所以我就想说啊，真的是松浩的强项。
That is, until Hebomai begins scoring Tetrises, and it's revealed he was merely building up as well. Song Hao tops out with 24 lines cleared, while Hebomai finishes with a staggering 66, an even more dominant lead than the first round. But there's an issue. Song Hao claims that his computer has an input delay, which if true would have impacted his performance. So, the judges decide to have the players switch computers and face off again, and surprisingly, Song Hao was right. Nah, I'm just fucking with you, he gets smoked again. Now his only hope is to tie the score by winning the final round, a versus battle. As expected, Hebomai wins again, securing a point for the Japanese team. Song Hao goes quiet and timid while the judges discuss the results, and the 2 head off to make way for the next set of contestants. So who is Hebomai really? He had been playing Tetris since he was a child, but he first entered the public eye playing Tetris Friends and other competitive guideline games around 2009. Soon after, he began focusing on improving his TGM skills, specializing in TI World. By the time of his TV appearance, he was consistently achieving both MMs and S13s, and by 2017 he had both GM and held the Shirase world record by a considerable margin. I mean, he's in the Hall of Champions. This wasn't a battle, it was an execution. Imagine if you won a high school basketball tournament and your reward is you get to do a live 1v1 against LeBron. There is also another notable aspect to these TV appearances. You might have noticed that Song Hao and the gaming team he faced were playing on computers, meaning they were on emulators. And unlike the initial challenge, the face-off wasn't done in a TGM game at all, it was done in Null Pamino. It was likely chosen by the producers for the wider range of customization it offered, and Hebomai stated he had no clue in advance that he was going to be playing it. But this, and his online name, would constitute a double transgression in Mihara's eyes. So what did Mihara have to say about this? While he had known Hebomai for years by this point and tried his best to ignore his username, he didn't seem to hear about his performance in China at the time. It wasn't until 2019 when a Japanese show covered said performance that Mihara learned about it, and he was seriously unimpressed. He claimed that Hebomai was promoting clones and demanded he change his username, and when he refused, Mihara loudly declared that he was banned from all future official TGM events, even though there hadn't been any yet, and he still goes out of his way to mention this occasionally, in true petty fashion. Back to the TGM crew. Unlike the previous year's performance, SGDQ 2017 didn't go so well. The crew had planned to up the wow factor by starting off with an 8-way TGM1 race, meaning the setup now required 4 arcade boards at once, but they overextended themselves. There were unexpected technical difficulties, and the larger-than-ever audience ended up having to sit around for well over an hour before the segment could even begin. To make things worse, the computer capturing the video would end up blue screening while the crew switched over to TI, further adding to the setup time.
Halfway to the $30,000 incentive. Let's see some donations toward that.
So first of all, I'd like to really apologize for what has happened today.
The rest of the exhibition went okay, but the crew would not return to GDQ for the foreseeable future. A similar event would take place later that year, but not in America. RTA in Japan is the Japanese equivalent to GDQ, hosted annually since 2016. The second event was held in December of 2017, and the Japanese TGM crew had received a 90-minute segment to showcase the series on the 31st. The segment began with a playthrough of TGM1 by 3-7, who was still the game's fastest player by a massive margin. After a close call at level 800, he finished with a 9:56, far from his best time, but achieving a sub 10-minute GM on command is a skill very few have. In a pleasant surprise, Kevin had also flown over, and he rejoined SQR to play TAP's Master Mode. SQR cut it too close and topped out just before 500, and Kevin made it to the end but couldn't quite meet the M-roll requirements. SQR attempted to redeem himself with a death run, but despite his impressive speed, he topped out again at 600. Then a doubles run, a very nice TI Master run from Kevin, a World Rule run from Hebomai, and what better way to close it off than with an S13. The next few years after 2017 were years of little news but much interest. A new wave of younger players were getting into the series thanks to the exposure from the various exhibitions. Mihara was still in negotiations with various publishers, albeit to little success. In April 2018, Kataru became the second Western player to achieve Classic GM, although not the second outside Japan. Another Chinese player had also recently achieved it. The raid of GMs was beginning to pick up. Hebomai achieved Classic GM in late 2018, Kataru got World GM in late 2019, even Wu Songhao got it in 2020.
Push! Stop! Grandmaster!
In late 2019, Mihara announced an official Japanese TAP tournament set for early next year, officially sanctioned by TTC as well. However, early next year also happened to be when the pandemic started, so that didn't really work out. The lockdown was fruitful for the overall community though, as the new wave of players were now stuck at home, with plenty of time to play the series. And Mihara did eventually manage to secure some official tournaments at Toshinsai in early 2022 and Evo Japan in early 2023. Also in 2023, Klex received the opportunity to showcase TGM at the French speedrunning event Speedong. He starts off strong with Master and Death GMs before moving on to TI. Klex was one of the best all-around TGM players in the West, but he was still only qualified MM, and if you're not a qualified GM, it's a bit difficult to give a performance more impressive than an MM game, unless you've made sure you meet the requirements for the GM exam. The audience is hilarious in this run. Since Klex has to get cools in every section, they start shouting every time he gets one.
Plusieurs lavages de lignes les uns à la suite des autres.
Oh, vous êtes fantastique,
c'est incroyable.
Normalement, le T-spin. Un bloc de marbre, il te fait un sens de tout ça, tu vois.
Spin, est-ce qu'il y a un cool?
Ah, le cool est là.
Le cool est là. Donc, pour l'instant, tous les cools de section sont validés.
Yes!
The crowd at this moment has no idea how the exam system works. They're going crazy over the performance, but what they don't know is that he might still fail the exam. He does know. This is either about to be really cool or really awkward.
C'est historique.
Oh.
C'est fou.
C'était cool, ouais.
We have arrived at the present day, so let's take a look at the current state of the TGM community. There are around 300 to 400 TGM1 GMs in the West, and likely thousands in Japan, many of which aren't recorded. There are around 200 Death GMs, of which around 40 are Western, and around 100 to 150 Tap Master GMs, of which around 35 are Western. There are, as far as we know, precisely 26 TI Classic GMs, of which 12 are Japanese, and 40 World GMs, of which only 9 are Japanese. TI has proved surprisingly popular outside Japan. The effects of the new wave are also visible. 2/3 of the World Rule GMs were achieved in just the past 5 years. Keen-eyed viewers may have noticed I never selected a Tap player for the Hall of Champions, and this is because both the Master and Death records are currently in heavy contention. The Master records for all grades progressed slowly from the 2000s up until 2017, when they were all held by a player named Ku. In the past few years, however, the record has been going back and forth between two players named Kashiwa and OST. Since both players are seconds away from breaking the 7-minute barrier, either one of them could be the first. On the Death side, 309 held the record from 2004 all the way to 2013, with one of his records lasting nearly 7 years. Kashiwa then held it up until 2023, when it was taken by an American player named Switch Palace Corner, who is currently the only Western sub-9 in TGM1, and the second Western player to hold the record for a main mode. The first was Eric ICX, winner of the 2022 Classic Tetris World Championship, who had also taken the record for Classic Shirase in early 2023. At the time, this was a pretty big lead, but interestingly, multiple other players have recently closed the gap. On the 13th of October 2025, a French player named Magent became the second to break the 4-minute barrier with a 3:58. A few months later, in January 2026, a Russian player named Iandis became the third with a 3:57, and just 2 days later he achieved a 3:56, although he was well ahead of Eric's record coming into 1,000. 6 hours after this run, Magent achieved a 3:54, also ahead of Eric for much of the run. Magent began playing TGM very recently. Formerly a modern Tetris player, he first got into the series after seeing Clicks as GM in 2023. Just over a year later, he was the youngest person to achieve TI GM at just 14 years old, and by 15 he had GM in both Classic and World. Iandis began playing a few years earlier, but is similarly strong in both rules. Since both of these runs occurred literally days ago at the time of recording, the record could be taken at any time. This occurred literally while I was editing, so I'm gonna... Jesus, okay, well that... Okay, hold on. Luckily for Hebomai, he's still well ahead for World. Eric was also not the only TGM player attending the Classic Tetris World Championship. In fact, the event had received quite a lot of attention over the years. It's the 23rd of October 2016. The 7th annual CTWC has just reached its final two, Jonas Neubauer and an unexpected dark horse named Jeff Moore. Jonas is the favourite to win by a mile. Out of the past 6 tournaments, he had won 5, losing only to Harry Hong in 2014. But Harry had a habit of coming close. After being second in the original 2010 event, he placed 3rd in 2011, 2nd again in 2013, 4th in 2015, and finally third again in 2016, having been taken down by Jeff in the top 4. Concurrently, Jonas was facing Corian. The former Grandmaster had since pivoted to NES Tetris, making it into the top 4 at his first CTWC at the ripe age of 39. He unfortunately lost to Jonas, so we're back to the finals.
Gear up for level 19.
Now they're neck and neck. Neck and neck.
Despite some great play from Jeff, Jonas narrowly pulls off his 6th victory. However, the most notable aspect of this match is the YouTube video, which, thanks to the exciting games and the memorable commentators,
Boom, Tetris for Jeff. Boom, Tetris for Jeff. Boom, boom, boom,
quickly grows to massive popularity. By late 2017, it's sitting at 7 million views, beating out the already popular 2015 match between Jonas and Kataru. Then comes CTWC 2017. Kataru, now sporting a mustache, defeats Corian in the top 16, followed by a player named Yanni in the top 8. Coming into the top 4, he's up against another former finalist named Quaid.
That was pretty exciting to see someone that we didn't know in the scene rise to the top, and now here you are top 4. How do you feel?
I'm extremely hungover.
Oh, sorry, he's up against Quaid's alter ego, Hauser, also sporting a definitely real mustache.
Not ideal pieces.
Oh, he couldn't get it over there. He couldn't slide over there. And this is what I was saying.
Alex tops out.
This is what I was saying. This could be Hauser's strategy here. And he is in prime position now to try to steal this one. But the stack is getting so high.
Yeah, that was not ideal. Alex!
Wait a second.
Who's that? Is that Quaid?
Part of me is now thinking of Total Recall, if people remember that line. You think this is the real Quaid? Playing really solid. He has been playing fantastic.
So it's Alex against Jonas, and surprisingly, Alex goes on to win. I'm just kidding, Jonas wins again. The top 4 for 2018 consists of 2 cross-generation matchups. The first is between the 37-year-old Jonas and the 20-year-old Green Tea. Green Tea was an incredibly quick learner who had begun practicing less than a year prior, and he had stunned at CTWC by making it all the way to the top 4, a feat probably aided by him also being one of the best TGM players on the planet. He had recently become both the 9th TI Classic GM and the 7th World GM, even beating out Hebomai. He was also the commentator at RTA in Japan. The top 4 match is best of 3. Jonas gets a point, Green Tea gets a point, so it's down to the final game to see who advances.
Oh, boom! Look at that, 35! He's only one Tetris behind! He's only one Tetris behind
Jonas
now.
just made one, though, so it's maintaining slightly...
Right. But boom Tetris for Green Tea. Boom Tetris for Jonas! You can't get any more neck and neck than
Look
this!
at that.
Oh, he had it!
Didn't go for the Tetris.
He had the Tetris!
Oh, there it is! Boom! Tetris for Green Tea, and the kill screen is here! Can he maneuver?
Can he live? Oh my
Double.
God! He's still alive!
Single! Jonas tops out.
And he's not going to be able to do it! Jonas is advanced! He has made it back to Grand Final!
Meanwhile, the 41-year-old Corian is up against the 16-year-old prodigy Joseph Saley, whose skill had also been improving at a blazing pace. With another close game, Joseph wins and advances to battle Jonas. Of course, Jonas goes on to... Actually, Joseph sweeps him. It's from this point that Jonas begins to fall behind, with Joseph popularizing the strong but physically taxing hyper-tapping technique. Jonas ends up in 25th place in 2019. Joseph faces Corian again for the finals, and he wins a second time.
First things first, let's give our runner-up trophy, and by the way, Alexei Pajitnov is here to hand out the trophies.
2019 was the last year a Japanese player made it to the top 4. Green Tea's focus had been shifting somewhat. In November 2018, Tetris Effect released to critical acclaim. CTWC 2018 had a side event where you could try the game before it came out, and Green Tea was hooked. Almost immediately upon release, he began practicing the game's Master Mode, a TGM-inspired 20G mode that gets faster as you progress. In early December, he became the first person to clear the mode by reaching 300 lines, and he continued grinding for a variety of other insane challenges, such as completing it without hold, the way Mihara would want. It was also around this time that Green Tea graduated from university, placing him in just the right spot to join Tetris Effect's development team as the lead game designer for the in-progress multiplayer expansion, Tetris Effect Connected. As a gamer, this is like the ideal result. Shortly afterwards, he also began playing the PlayStation port of TG. Wait, what? In November 2021, Mihara announced that his upcoming announcement regarding a home console port of a TGM game would be postponed. Given his history of announcing things that would then not happen, this comment was largely forgotten about, but around a year later, Arika officially announced that TGM1 was getting home console ports. They did the smart thing, which was waiting until they knew it could be released. And it wasn't some random console where it would be doomed to receive no attention. The game was coming to both the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 4. The ports were being developed by game publisher Hamster Corp as part of their Arcade Archives series, through which they had been porting a wide variety of classic arcade games to modern consoles since 2014. TGM would be the company's first foray into a port of a 32-bit game, and it was not a quick process. In a live stream shortly after the announcement, the team shared a note from Mihara, which contained some surprising details. First of all, the talks regarding the ports had begun over 3 years prior, which was at least 2 years before he first tweeted about it. On top of its length, Mihara also admitted that the production period was fraught with conflict as a result of his stubborn attitude, mainly regarding lag, which he apologized for, but it was revealed that Mihara was not the one with the final say about the release, but instead producer Hiroshima. The ever-disgruntled Mihara vaguely hinted at his dissatisfaction with the result, but Hiroshima was happy enough. Thus, the ports released on December 1st. The gameplay itself is largely identical to the original, but some nice things have been added, such as 2 new modes with official online leaderboards. The first is High Score mode, which tracks your grade and the time it took to attain it, and it comes with an option to start at 20G. The other is Caravan mode, with the goal of achieving the highest score in 5 minutes, this time with an option for Big mode. Also, you can pause the game now. The ports had a few bugs on release, but these were fixed quickly, and overall they're pretty faithful ports that lend themselves well to modern controllers. So, after 24 years, the game originally planned for home consoles had finally come to home consoles. The most promising implication of this was that the West now had an official way to play the series that didn't require buying and importing a board, which coincidentally happened to be more difficult than ever. Since the recent pandemic had caused the closure of many arcades and increased the desire to play at home, and due to the growth of the community, the prices for boards had skyrocketed. Average prices for TGM1 had jumped from $2 to $3 to $500, and TAP and TI were both well over $1,000. The ports cost $7.99. It's worth noting that the new releases had been far from a guarantee. I don't know exactly what happened licensing-wise, whether TTC had changed as a company or if they had simply been convinced, but the size of the community, the popularity of the showcases, they showed definitively that people wanted to play the TGM series. And Mihara recognized this. With some of the weight off his shoulders, he was interacting with Western players quite actively. There was also something else. Back in the non-announcement, Mihara claimed that a new TGM game game was still on the table, and no more arcade releases. Arcades were dead and buried by this point, so it can only be concluded that Arika and TTC were finally working out a home console license. However, whether or not TTC would go ahead with the release apparently depended entirely on the success of the hamster ports. So how successful were they? It's difficult to tell exactly how many people were buying the ports, but it was somewhere in the ballpark of 20,000 purchases in the first few months. Not too bad. And in case TGM1 doesn't catch your interest, in May 2023 it was announced that Hamster had also been working on porting TAP. The ports released on June 1st. Similar to the first game, they include a high score mode, which can be played on Master or TGM Plus, and a caravan mode, which can be played on normal or death. Other than that, it's nearly identical. The TAP ports appeared to be selling similarly well, but coming into 2024, it seemed that there were no plans to port TI, so all the players could do was buy TGM and TAP and hold their breath. New Tetris is coming. Arika Co. Limited and the Tetris Company Incorporated signed a license agreement on the new Tetris game. New Tetris will implement new ideas based on the concept of Tetris that makes good at Tetris, and is scheduled to be released during fiscal year 2024. Please stay tuned for further details. This was happening. The Catch-22 had been broken. The name was revealed on December 3rd. The Masters of Round had been dropped. The game was now called It's somewhat of a downgrade, to be honest. Mihara supposedly went through a long list of name ideas, and this is what they ended up with? He also apparently had to scrap the Tetris that makes you better at Tetris catchphrase, as according to him, it hasn't been medically or statistically proven yet. Anyway, what about the platform? Mihara revealed that the game was to be a Steam release, which is fantastic. After decades of relegating the TGM series to the least profitable platforms, TTC had just licensed the game for the biggest market possible. There had also been a lot of changes and additions compared to the 2015 location tests, so there was reason for excitement. Arika was aiming for a release by the end of the fiscal year, meaning by the end of March 2025. This turned out to be a tough deadline to hit, with the development team entering crunch time coming into 2025, but in the end they weren't far off. On the 3rd of April 2025, the Japanese and Western communities finally got to play Tetris the Grandmaster 4 Absolute Eye. Like with TI, AE comes with two rule sets, now called Standard for the Guideline style and TGM for the TGM style. The TGM rule comes with 5 modes: Normal, Asuka, Master, Konoha, and Shiranui. Standard rule drops Normal and replaces it with Marathon. Let's go through the modes in order. Marathon is the Guideline enforced 150 line score attack, who cares? Normal is not like normal from TAP, it's practically just TAP Master, except the grading system is this weird X of Y type thing that mainly requires getting lots of Tetrises. Asuka is designed to be the intermediate mode. It plays similarly to Death, but with some notable differences. Instead of a Torikan, there's now just a time limit, similar to the cut Kamui. Clearing a Tetris causes a Kitsune to appear, and you must obtain 1 per 100 level section in order to progress, encouraging you to set up for Tetrises. Despite the speed, the extra next pieces, hold, and the infinite rotations all make the mode a bit easier than Death, as does a rewind feature allowing you to undo mistakes. Good for practice, but if you want to make it to the end and achieve Asuka Master, you'll want to avoid rewinding to make the time limit. Asuka also features a little bit of invisible near the end. Master is the new rounds, with the same fast speeds and frozen gimmick, now named Peaky. However, some additional gimmicks are also introduced further into the mode, more on those later. Konoha's still the same, you like big mode? Finally, Shiranui, a versus mode against an AI opponent. Developing this AI was apparently the main reason meeting the deadline was so difficult, which is crazy because it sucks. Occasionally it will just forget what it's doing and mess up catastrophically, meaning the strategy for Shiranui is just to play it over and over until you get a lucky game and unlock some higher tiers. There is a versus mode, but no online multiplayer as many had hoped. Apparently the online license would have cost too much. And there's another feature that makes AE weirder. The game comes with an extra button that significantly reduces the weight between pieces when held. Yes, the game has a go faster button, and it's not a toggle, you have to hold it down. Needless to say, it's one of the more controversial aspects. The game also features Mavis Beacon Teaches Tetris, a practice mode with a textbook for certain common situations. And free with every purchase, you also get a large quantity of bugs and issues. Marvel at the inability to rebind the keyboard controls, leaving 90% of the player base stuck with the weird defaults. Apparently, they just didn't think to add this. In fact, the game was just generally janky on keyboards, because it turns out the testing was done almost exclusively on arcade controls. Also, the game just didn't start for some people. I guess they couldn't afford the testing license. The game was not received well upon release. Rounds of review bombing were reinforced by a torrent of complaints in the Steam forums, on Discord, Twitter, basically everywhere. But not to worry, the proactive Mihara was ready to work on a series of bureaucratically delayed updates. Being on Steam came with the benefit that updates were easy, however apparently a lot of things had to be confirmed with TTC, meaning even basic changes took some time. But over the course of April, the big issues were patched, and once those were out of the way, the game itself was surprisingly decent, a lot more appealing than the location tests. Since AE was by far the most widely available game in the series, Mihara wanted to make sure it had something for everyone, and there was a good amount of variety. But most of the interest among top players was on Master. At level 1000, you're greeted with the first new gimmick, Cyclone, where the pieces spawn in a random orientation. Then at 1300 comes Master Peaky, where the tiles freeze permanently if they aren't cleared fast enough. This is a surprisingly challenging gimmick. If you stack normally, only Tetrises bring the stack down, meaning you eventually have to start throwing every piece in the well, and if you cover it, it's over, you can't fix it. The medals, which come from Tetrises and such, do increase the time before the pieces freeze, but the end of Master was supposedly level 2000 at least, meaning the top players would have to survive at least 700 more levels, with both the Master Peaky and Cyclone. The M grade appeared at 1100, so achieving GM could be as simple as making it to the end. The community just had to figure out a consistent way to survive the gimmicks. One of the most promising candidates was Kirby 703, a great all-around Tetris player and strategist, with TI GM in both roles. Kirby immediately began testing ideas after AE's release, often utilizing the practice mode to start at 1300, though this won't award any grade. By the 13th, she had devised the Machine, a standard rule well set up that once frozen could work with almost any combination of pieces. It didn't make surviving easy, you still had to retain the shape of the well, but it was using this technique that Kirby first discovered Master went beyond 2000.
Holy shit, it goes past 2,000, dude. We're so toast.
However, the next day, green tea also reached 2000 in TGM rule, which necessitated a more straightforward technique. The mode could end at 2200, double the M requirement, but Mihara had hinted back at the 2015 location test that rounds went even beyond 2600. On the 17th, Kirby got a very promising run coming into 2000.
Hey man! What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Yes! This setup works!
Well, we know something happens at 2600. It appeared that some kind of requirement hadn't been met, but it could just be because the run was in practice mode. Luckily, this turned out not to be the case.
Huh?
It was soon determined that passing the barrier requires either a Tetris or a line clear with no frozen tiles. Now all that was left was to achieve it outside of practice mode. By this point, Mihara had begun keenly watching Kirby's streams. Meanwhile, Green Tea had pulled ahead of the competition for TGM rule, having pulled off a 21:47 in practice. This was quickly followed up by a 22:10 and a 24:47.
Fuck. Oh my god, I could have gotten a Tetris. Holy shit. Oh my god, I actually did it. What does that mean? Huh? My heart's racing.
Huh?
Explain. Stepping back one piece at a time. This is Koro Bainiki, but like not. What? What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? GM! GG!
It's difficult to say for sure whether or not achieving GM in AE is harder than achieving it in TI. The modes are just too different. It was certainly achieved a lot faster, although that undoubtedly comes down to the overall increase in skill among the community. And besides, TGM rule was still undefeated, and there was still the end game, whatever that entails. It wasn't clear why Kirby was sent back to the seemingly arbitrary 1695, but the timer implied that the goal was to make it all the way back to 2600. There were also technically 3 types of GM. Each grade has a bronze version for TGM rule, silver for standard, and achieving both makes it gold in the menu. By the 11th, Green Tea had achieved 2600 in practice, but he was not the first TGM rule player to manage this. 2 days prior, an Australian player named Yoshi had also achieved both 2600 in practice and a 2599 in the real mode. On the 12th of May, Yoshi became the first TGM rule GM, with Green Tea achieving it less than a day later, although by this point the game had been updated so that any line clear passes the barrier. Mihara felt it was too frustrating. Khan had also been practicing Master, although he was intentionally staying away from discussion to avoid spoilers. The result of this is that when he eventually achieved GM, he was not aware that the game would keep going. The gold GM was still up for grabs, but the main interest was the end game, particularly the fact that the rewind levels seemed to be different each time. It was soon figured out that the level reversed back to where it was 65 seconds ago, and players were then given another 65 seconds to make it back to 2600. However, Kirby realized something. A, the only requirement for getting the end game seemed to be reaching 2600 in under 7:15, not a very strict time limit. And B, Standard Rule has infinite move resets. Thus, supposedly, all she had to do to beat the end game was arrive at the end with a reasonable pace, stall the game for a minute, and it would barely rewind. At least, in theory.
I'm gonna go out to like 644. Because that's like 64 seconds. Oh, that's such a relief. Let's hit this. Let's do this. Got the orange line GM, the GM++, whatever you call it. Wow, this is one hell of a cutscene. I gotta say that much. GM rounds?
Kirby did the thumbnail for this video on stream and changed it to say "You Ayer" again, and it turned out Mihara was watching that. Achieving GM rounds in TGM rule was going to be considerably more difficult due to the lack of cheesing opportunities. The plan was to intentionally play slower approaching 2600 as long as you were under the 7:15 time requirement, and then to speed up during the endgame. On the 30th of May, Yoshi reached 2226 in the endgame, and later that same day he found himself surviving even further. But he had rewound pretty far back, beating the timer was going to be a challenge.
Oh my god. Oh.
Yes!
Oh!
Yes! Oh my god!
It happened!
Oh my god!
Yes!
It happened!
Round 6?
Round 6?
6?
There's more?
Oh, what?
Mihara seemed to have lost the plot. The grades beyond GM rounds had actually been added less than a day before round 6 was achieved. Yoshi started grinding for it because they had just been added. Mihara insisted that he had planned the new grades for a while, and they had simply been unlocked to prevent them from being data mined too early, but it certainly did appear as if he and the development team were just adding whatever random crap now that they could easily put out updates. I mean, having a higher tier of GM was a nice goal, but GM round 6? On July 1st, a third player achieved a rounds grade, a feat that took 2 months of constant practice, even with the help of the Kirby machine. How many rounds grades were there? Was Mihara just going to add more whenever someone gets the best grade? And what determines the number you get? Mihara stated that any existing rounds grades would be upgraded if they qualified for a number, but as of the update there only was one rounds player and she was still graded at regular GM rounds, implying that cheesing won't earn you any number. After the bugs were mostly fixed, the game also began to receive other forms of new content. The new rounds grades had been added in version 1.5. Version 1.6, released a month later, added 2 brand new modes, Asuka Easy and Asuka Hard. Asuka Easy is Asuka, but easier, and of course it has an entirely different grading system, and the same acronym as the game, which I hate. Asuka Hard requires beating Asuka to unlock, and it's Asuka, but harder. The time limit is a lot shorter, and more kitsunes are required to pass each section, which combined make beating the mode extremely difficult, more so than even GM. It was widely assumed that beating it would award some other new grade, but nobody could come close at the time of release. Since the game already had easy, intermediate, and hard modes, adding another set of easy and hard modes kind of diluted it. Presumably in an attempt to combat this, version 1.7 modified normal to be extremely slow, even slower than TGM1, thus making it even more of a beginner mode than Asuka Easy, unless you hold extra to make it fast again. Concurrently to all this drama, plans were being made to showcase the game in a few major places. CTWC 2025 featured a TGM4 side event, planned mainly by Kataru and sponsored by Arika. A few Arika employees even took a trip over to attend the event, including producer Hiroshima. Unfortunately, however, the tournament experienced a notable lack of top TGM talent. The NES specialists were unequipped to handle 20G, and the few TGM players present were only there because they were also involved with CTWC. The top four were Green Tea, Eric, Kataru, and a player named Brodendamp. Green Tea and Eric moved on to the finals, but the skill difference was obvious, and Green Tea won 2-0.
You know, you are synonymous with classic Tetris. You're the world champion from 2022. What is it about TGM that you really enjoy playing?
I personally think that TGM is a better designed game than classic Tetris. So, oh my god.
By this point, the overall skill and techniques in classic Tetris had advanced so much that none of these players even made it to the top 32. Kataru, formerly a two-time finalist, was now ranked 78th. Later, on August 14th, the TGM series returned to RTA in Japan. This time around, the event was a three-way AE Master Battle featuring Korian, the player who recently got rounds 8, and a long-time TGM player named Haruku. Green Tea was commentating again, having recently achieved GM rounds himself, along with producer Hiroshima, who was calling in from home. The format is simple. The players are given 45 minutes to achieve the best master score they can, but only a single GM was managed. The game was just too recent. Even for the top players, consistency was difficult. Version 1.8 released in early September, adding another 3 modes. Reaching the end of normal now unlocks 1.1, a mode almost identical in speed to TGM1, just with stricter grade requirements. Clearing 1.1 unlocks 2.1, reminiscent of Death, and clearing 2.1 unlocks 3.1, reminiscent of Shirase. And yes, all 3 of these modes have their own GM grades, although the 3.1 GM is by far the most difficult. Back in 2005, Mihara used to claim that Shirase went beyond 1300, which it didn't, but now it actually does. 1300 is a Torikan, and 3.1 continues at blazing speed all the way to 2000, which will award S20. And just to make it a bit more sadistic, achieving GM also requires doing extremely well in the big mode role. As with Asuka Hard, it's an extremely daunting task. Speaking of Asuka Hard, on the 10th of October, the mode was finally beaten by a Japanese player named SKH, who was also one of the first TI GMs. As it turns out, Asuka Hard also has its own GM grade, meaning there were now 5 separate GMs in the game, not including the 2 secret grades and all the rounds variants. A few weeks later, the second Asuka GM was achieved by Eandis. Back in June, he had become the 5th Master GM, and he was now going for a rounds grade. By August, all 4 of the previous GMs had also achieved rounds, but Eandis was hoping to leapfrog the competition and take the record for the highest rounds grade. In early September, Green Tea took the lead with rounds 10, and by this point it was pretty much confirmed that the grade is determined purely by the level you rewind to in the endgame. This creates a gamble. Using the stalling strat will only ever get you the base GM rounds. If you want a higher grade, you have to go faster. But the faster you go before 2600, the harder it is to match that pace in the endgame. And Eandis had been failing an enormous number of endgames. Green Tea had rewound to 1577 for his rounds 10, so if there was a higher grade, the border was probably around 1550. On November 1st, Eandis managed to rewind to 1531, and the endgame was looking good. Mihara, you've done it again. Eandis was determined to find the highest rounds grade. He already had 700 hours in a game that was barely 6 months old, and he was still playing every day. The obvious next goal would be a sub 1500 rewind, possibly even a sub 1400 if he got lucky. He got lucky. On the 26th, he managed an astounding 1348.
Does my grandma's cutlery bring you back to your own childhood, dappled with memories of heirlooms and stories, passed down through generations? Or are you a mere child of the future, all brick, steel, and silver, hungering for the taste of something, anything, a little more human?
Ебать! Что я сделал? Ебать! Я чё ебанутый? Что произошло?
This was followed up on December 11th by a rewind all the way back to 1293. 1300 was a big goal. It's the halfway point of the mode, it's the point where Master Peaky starts, and it was presumably the border for a new grade. Unfortunately, most good runs played out like this. On the 22nd, he managed a 1279. Failed. Then on the 24th, a 1298, also failed. He did manage to complete a rewind to 1312, but it was another Sir Lancelot. The rate of sub 1300s was increasing. He only needed to survive one. So what is the future of Tetris? As it stands today, the scene is heavily split. Classic Tetris is the largest and the youngest it's ever been, to the point that some players are making the news.
The middle schooler, known by the name Blue Scooty in the gaming world, made it to level 157 on the original Nintendo version of the game, strategically stacking various blocks to make them disappear, eventually triggering what gamers call a kill screen.
Modern guideline Tetris has also developed quite a large community in recent years, and it's worth noting that although there are popular official games like the wonderfully extravagant Tetris Effect, an enormous number of players are congregating around unofficial games. Tetrio, probably the largest unofficial block stacking game, is currently sitting at just under 10 million total users, and many of them are sweats. Tetris is very much more than just a casual game these days, something that TTC is clearly ambivalent about. Most of the games they license are still basic slop, aimed at the broadest audience possible, and most of the competitive high-level communities are built around games that are either non-guideline or fan-made or both. But Henk and his company have stopped trying to obliterate any block stacking game vaguely resembling Tetris. TTC like classic Tetris, and they tolerate Tetrio and all the other fan games as long as they don't use the word Tetris. So where does the TGM series stand in all this? 30 years ago, Mihara made a gamble that people wanted to get good at Tetris, that it could work as a challenging brain game for real gamers, and not just that thing you play once every few years. And he was right. He went for that market before anyone else did. But people need to see and access a game to play it, and TTC had no interest in taking a gamble on a niche market, even if it's literally no effort on their part. By the 2000s, the series was heading straight for obscurity, just another niche Japanese game series slowly being pulled from arcades. But against all odds, and spreading largely through video sharing and word of mouth, an international community formed anyway. And it continued growing. Just watching people pull off these extraordinary feats was enough to get people to give it a try, and the series had a habit of hooking people. So, eventually, TTC had to concur that people did want to play this, because Tetris the Grandmaster is a good game. Through extreme perseverance and a lot of patience, Mihara finally received the golden opportunity to release a TGM game that anyone can play. The story of TGM is not over, it's still unfolding as we speak. I mean, since King of Rounds was achieved, Mihara already added 4.1, which was comically impossible, leading to a nerf which then allowed Green Tea to beat it almost immediately. This is par for the course these days. Would I recommend AE to new players? I don't know. It tries to have something for everyone, but it's kind of all over the place at the moment. Maybe eventually the updates will settle down and the game will solidify, but for now, if you own a Switch, I highly recommend trying out the first game. Supposedly, Mihara was an S3 class player back when it released, so if you'd like an easier goal to get yourself started, try going for that. It's a highly satisfying feeling. So even if you're not a fan of the new game, and even if you're not a fan of Mihara, give the TGM series a try. Maybe make some videos about it, talk to the community, but don't think it's too daunting to start playing. TGM was a labor of love. It wasn't made because some billion-dollar company did a risk analysis and decided it was easy profit. It wasn't made because a new console was coming out and someone might as well put Tetris on it. It was made because a person had a fun idea and wanted people to play it. Every bit of this history, from the core to the fringes, from the beginning to the end, is imbued with a fight for natural-born entertainment, made by the people for the people. And it's our job to preserve that history, to continue that fight, or else we lose all of this. We lose all of this.